Wind scoured the basalt flats of Thria like a rasp, driving flurries of black ice across the shattered outpost. Sergeant Rowan Hale tasted iron in the recycled air of his visor and smoke in the seams of his teeth. The 17th Terran Rangers were down to 2 full squads and a handful of limping stragglers. Overhead, auroral bands flickered, Thria's magnetics dancing with the fallout of rail orbital strikes. "Keep north! Convergence Ridge, now!" Lieutenant Isila barked over squadet, voice snagging with static and fatigue. The ground kept punching, regular, clockwork impacts. Not random shelling. Someone had their range, and the someone wore mirror-bright armor and sang in clicks. Rowan vaulted a collapsed habitat strut, boots skidding on glass snow. As he landed, his HUD flashed a flicker at the edge of rubble, a heat signature too small, too still. He froze, scanning through smoke. There, huddled in a torn cocoon of insulation, a child. Not human. Limbed in pale light, the small being's skin held the matte gleam of polished graphite, hair like spun frost, and eyes that caught his visor glare and returned it in impossible violet. "Sergeant Hale, report." Isila again. "We're losing the corridor." Rowan's finger found the selector on his rifle and didn't move. Orders were simple: avoid contact with Oricans, combatant or civilian. Delay meant death, everyone knew that. But the child's 6-jointed hands clutched a strip of woven cloth and curled tighter when the wind howled. A whine gathered, a high, mosquito-thin overtone that made the hair at Rowan's nape stand. "Scatter!" he shouted, already moving. He didn't remember the decision so much as the impact. He threw himself over the small body, a human shield as the nearby ridge expelled light. The blast tore a groove across the ruins, heat searing through plate seams to find flesh, shrapnel sleeting like metallic rain. Silence rang after. He tasted blood. Something trembled under his forearms, alive. He peeled back, vision tunneling, pain needling his ribs. The child stared without sound, pupils dilated to drowning. "Rowan?" Isila breathed. "Say something." "I've got intel," he rasped, hating the lie, securing the child in his emergency sling and cinching it to his chest where he could wrap both arms. "Coming in hot." Torres, the youngest in the squad, trotted up when Rowan rejoined the rear. He looked down, eyebrows shooting. "What is?" "Not your problem." Rowan pushed past, lungs filing protests with every step. The shelling stopped. That frightened him more than the noise. They tumbled into a cleft ravine pinched by black ice. Lieutenant Isila ripped off her helmet, steam blowing from her mouth in the sudden quiet. "Casualty count?" "No." Eyes tracked to Rowan's chest. Questions flared, then hardened when he eased the sling down, and the small Orican blinked at them all. "Absolutely not," Isila said, voice stunned flat. "You brought an Orican into my retreat?" "It's a child." Rowan loosened the sling. The being flinched, but didn't bolt. In the dim, its skin refracted the camp's heater glow, a rain of color skittering beneath a graphite surface. "Alone. Freezing." Isila's hand found her sidearm by reflex. "It could be a beacon. A decoy. We have orders." The squad gathered, mud-spattered faces, pupils shot, adrenaline souring in the shared air. Torres shifted, uneasy. "LT, look at it. That's a kid. Protocols exist to keep us alive," Isila snapped. She stepped forward, gun angling. Hale stepped back. Rowan stood his ground, the pain in his side sharpening, strangely clarifying. The child, tiny, stoic, watched him with those violet eyes. Trust was too strong a word, but there was a kind of stillness there that pinned him. "With respect, ma'am. I'm not handing her over to die. That's insubordination." The lieutenant's jaw worked. A decision formed in her shoulders. "Then you're off my books." "You walk away with that, you don't walk back to us." The relief in her eyes at not having to pull the trigger hurt Rowan more than the shrapnel. He slung the child again and checked his beacon, then killed it. "I'll find another way to a roof." Isila hesitated. "You're throwing away your life for an alien." Rowan glanced down. The child's lips were chapped like slate. Maybe I'm remembering why lives matter. No one stopped him as he turned east, away from the extraction vector. The wind took words, swallowed them in the canyon's throat. Night on Thria fell like a lid, and the temperature with it. The ravine corkscrewed into a cave whose mouth was hidden beneath a spill of vitrified snow. Inside, stone that had sweated and frozen for centuries, pockets of hoarfrost glittering like seed stars. The child's tremors eased when Rowan activated a miserly heat coil. He scrounged a water ampoule, cracked it, and offered a sip. "Rowan," he said, tapping his chest. He kept his voice low, the way you did with frightened dogs and broken machines. The little Orican tapped a hand to their breastbone, a precise, elegant gesture. "Kir." The consonant caught like a flake of ice. They pointed at Rowan's faceplate, then at the coil, making a circling motion with their fingers. "Warm," Rowan translated, maybe wrongly. He broke a ration into deposit-sized bits, and set them on a panel between them. Kir sniffed, touched the food to their tongue, made a face, then, with visible resolve, ate. The coil hummed. The wind outside moved in long, bowling sighs. Rowan inspected his wounds, did field stitches by lamplight, and tried not to calculate the math of their odds. The Thrian flats in winter were an infinite white-black equation with too many variables and an answer that didn't love humans. Hours folded. Kir slept in the sling, breath shallow but steady. Rowan took first watch, then second when there was no one to relieve him. He drifted in and out of a half-dream of rivets and rust and a stubborn engine that wouldn't catch. A new sound knifed the cave, a subsonic purr that tickled the inner ear. He cut the coil, darkness swallowing them. The purr became a harmonized triad, Orican skimmers, if briefings weren't lying. Kir's eyes opened, suddenly bright. They touched Rowan's wrist and pointed deeper into the cave, past the safe warmth, into cold black unknown. "You sure?" Rowan whispered, knowing foolishly he was asking a child of another species to confirm a map he didn't have. Kir nodded once, the motion adult and certain. Rowan packed the coil, hoisted Kir, and followed a seam in the stone that became a throat, that became a stair, that became, unexpectedly, architecture. He knew the silhouette even under ice, a Terran sigil, half buried on a bulkhead. An old listening post, probably mothballed when Thria's weather/radiation made sensors sulk. He forced a stuck door, air coughing stale dust. Inside, strips of glow paint still answered his touch. They found a central chamber like a ribcage. Conduits, dormant arrays, a storage wall that still hummed when he coaxed the ancient cells awake. Heat trickled back like blood. Kir stepped from his arms and patted a precise perimeter, touching panels with reverent curiosity. Their fingers were long, tipped with soft pads that left patterns and condensation, geometry Rowan couldn't name. "Home for now," he said. The system agreed with a grudging thrum. Over the next 2 days, the post became a refuge. Rowan patched vents, reset locks, spun tripwire microsensors across the approach tunnels. He skimmed the med cabinet, and found enough to clean his wounds properly. Kir watched, learned, and in turn taught words, gestures. The Orican language, Auric, sat in the mouth like music and math had a child. "Water," Rowan said, showing a canister. Kir answered with a chord of syllables, each stacked, vibrating in his bones. He tried. Kir laughed. Soft, crystalline, adjusted his lips and tongue with the lightest touch, and he said it close enough that the room felt briefly gilded. On the third morning, motion pings. Movement near the outer mouth. Rowan routed a feed to a dusty console. 4 figures fanned across the ledge, Terran recon, armbands of the 9th. He killed the screens, pulse spiking. "In here," he whispered. Kir already understood. They folded themselves into a maintenance crawlspace Rowan had cleared as a bolt hole. Through the grate voices carried. "Thermal ghosting. Someone lit a coil. Hale's beacon died out here. Orders are pick up the deserter." A laugh, ugly because it was afraid. Rowan's palm found Kir's. The child squeezed, calm, somehow calming him. He watched boots tramp inches away. One paused. Hear that? Rowan could hear only the blood in his ears. Footsteps receded. Silence returned, fragile as spun sugar. He waited another day before breathing fully again. They couldn't stay. He knew it, Kir knew it. The recon team had left little, no obvious bugs, but air carried rumors and soldiers carried stubbornness. Rowan packed the salvageable gear, redistributed weight, and showed Kir how to wear a heat wrap under the sling. As they ate a final warmed ration, Kir produced a battered oval from a crate, a Terran translator seed, cracked and flickering. They laid it on the deck and tapped a pattern into its shell. 5 beats, rest 2 beats, rest 3. The seed answered with an anemic chirp and spat a line of on-screen glyphs. Kir spoke to it in a soft, ascending series of tones. The seed groaned, squinted, then burped audio in halting Terran. Mother, search, name, Kir, priority lineage, manifest. Rowan sat back. Your mother's looking for you? Kir's chin lifted in that elegant, adult way. Sho, Dilan, they said slowly, pressing the syllables into shape, then touched their chest. Matri. A word like a bell. Rowan's logic tree branched and branched. If Kir's mother outranked anyone he'd seen planetside, then the search grid would be inexorable. They were no longer invisible. They were in the light. Okay, he said. We move toward the eastern breaks. Traders sometimes run shadow quiet there. He didn't say out loud that if they were found, it'd be by an Orican unit, and maybe, there'd be a better gamble in that than Terran grace. They entered the tunnels at twilight, his HUD painting the chthonic world in wireframe. Kir set a steady pace. When the passages forked, they often pointed left before Rowan's maps argued for it. Later, his old schematics would insist that left had been the right choice. He decided not to question the physics of a child's certainty. On the second day, distant steps multiplied. Scanners reported heat blooms fluttering at the edge of range, then vanishing. Hurting. The word sat cold in Rowan's gut. He cut back, climbed narrow chimneys that rasped his armor, slid down slick chutes that stole his breath. Twice, they killed lights and froze while sleek figures passed, their armor reading as moving mirrors. The third time, the patrol stopped. The lead figure cocked their head like they were listening to someone far away. Silence lengthened, then, without comment, the unit withdrew, leaving only the brief scent of cold metal and something sweet, like snow-melt sap. Why? Rowan whispered. Kir tilted their head, then drew a spiral in the thin frost with a fingertip. At its center, they pressed their pad and left a star. He didn't understand the picture, but he understood the answer. Someone else's choice had bent away from them, for now. By the 7th day, the tunnels opened into a cathedral of stone, a cavern so large it birthed its own weather, fog drift weaving between stalagmites like ghosts confused about where to haunt. Rowan's nape prickled. Too open. Too staged. He palmed Kir back with his free hand, scanning. The first spear of light hit his visor, white, blue, and total. When his vision cleared, he counted 12 Orican soldiers on the floor and an unknown number on the ledges, weapons like shards of sculpture aimed at his heart. Don't move, he told Kir, though the child already stood stone still. A figure stepped from shadow, taller than the others, armor ornamented in a way that suggested not vanity but office. Their helm retracted, and Rowan saw the same violet eyes he'd learned to read, older now, harder, and holding a grief that had been disciplined into a blade. Kir made a sound that was neither name nor cry but somewhere between, and ran forward. Rowan didn't raise his rifle. He didn't move at all. The tall Orican knelt and gathered Kir with a care that cracked Rowan open. Their voice, when it came, was chord, 3 notes held in tension that his translator seed tried and failed to parse. One of the soldiers offered a more robust translator, living metal unfurling like a flower, and the Archon spoke again. I am Dilan of House Seth, Marshal of the Third Spiral. You, human, took my child into your care at cost to your own life. The device rendered the melody into comprehensible Terran without stripping all its music. Rowan swallowed. Kir was alone in a kill zone. I couldn't not. Weapons lowered a fraction. Delon regarded him with a gaze Rowan associated with hand-built machines, intent, measuring, unafraid to find he was wanting. You have been taught we are monsters, Delon said softly. That we do not mourn. They looked down at Kir, then back. Those lessons were lies convenient to your profiteers of war. No argument rose to Rowan's lips. What could he say? He'd held the lie himself, years ago, because a simple enemy is easier to carry into battle than a complicated neighbor. You will come, Delon said. It wasn't a threat. It was gravity. A soldier stepped with restraints. Thalen's fingers flicked. No. He is unbound, they said without looking away from Rowan. Honor holds him better than steel. Rowan breathed once, twice. He unshouldered his rifle, locked the action, and handed it grip first to the nearest soldier. All right. He reached for Kir's hand by force of habit and froze, unsure if that was allowed. Kir solved the question by grabbing his glove with both palms and tugging. Thalen's mouth softened, the smallest movement, but unmistakable. He had seen pictures. He was not prepared. The Orican transport embedded in the cavern wall wasn't a ship so much as a grown thing, arches reading like ribs, corridors shimmering between translucent and opaque as if the hull breathed. The air tasted faintly of mint and lightning. As they walked, the floor under his boots changed texture to match his stride, finding a rhythm with his weight. The soldiers neither menaced nor ignored him. They moved around him the way water shapes itself around a rock. Kir kept his hand and talked in a torrent to Delon, whose face hardly moved yet somehow conveyed too much: shock, relief, calculation, all caged by discipline. They arrived at a chamber that carried the controlled hum of a bridge but felt like a chapel. Screens, if that was the word, showed starfields and waveforms in colors his HUD admitted it had no vocabulary for. Delon dismissed the escort, leaving only 2 officers at doors. You are Rowan Hale, said the translator, breathing the words from the lattice at Thalen's throat. 17 confirmed engagements. Trained as a field medic before promotion. Your file is extensive. You read it? Rowan said stupidly. Of course they had. We read beyond it, Delon replied. It listed what you killed, not what you chose to save. He didn't realize he'd expected trial until his spine relaxed. What happens to me? Thalen's eyes, wary stars, held his. On Thria's stone, you cut a line between obedience and compassion and stepped to our side of it. Among our people, there is an answer for such a choice. We call it thread binding. You would call it. They searched for a word, tasted several, and made a face. Kin shield. You protected our blood. Our law binds you to that blood in return. Bound? The word raised every Terran hackle. Thalen's expression did something a human might have called a smile if a smile could be both sad and formal. Not as property. As family you chose and chose you back. They sealed him and Kir and Delon in a small room where the walls softened to listening. A tray unfolded, a ceremonial blade, its edge a whisper, a dimpled sphere that pulsed in time with something Rowan recognized as his own heartbeat, a coil of silver-clear fiber like spider strands strung with light. Delon cleaned the blade with the care of a craftsperson, then held Rowan's right hand between long, warm palms. This tastes of theater to your people, the translator murmured, fading into the background of Thalen's natural voice. But for us, it is a contract made visible. Rowan nodded, pulse loud. I'm still Terran, he said, because the words needed to be in the air. You are still yourself, Delon corrected gently. That is the only part that matters. They made a small, precise cut along his palm. He hissed and watched his blood rise, red as any dawn. Delon did the same, their blood welling dark silver, catching the room's light in prisms. Delon pressed their palm to his, and the coil of thread lifted like it was made of breath, twining their hands. The dimpled sphere on the tray pulsed faster, and Rowan felt something he had no language for, a softening of distance in his chest, a recognition he had done once or twice with engines that refused to start until he was kinder. Kir laid their smaller palm atop, completing the stack. Their voice braided with Thalen's in a melody that his translator wisely did not try to reduce. It was not an oath in the human sense. It was a promise spoken to the world. When they finished, the thread flashed, sank into skin, and left a faint, luminous pattern across Rowan's wrist like frost on glass. The Lan released him slowly. "Kin shield," they said. "Not soldier. Not captive. This is now true." He flexed his hand. It didn't hurt. It simply felt, accompanied. The Amaranth was a city knotted around a spine of singing metal. Gardens grew in terraces under light that mimicked no sun Rowan had seen, leaves bending in planes rather than arcs. People, oricans of ages Rowan couldn't yet read, watched him and Kir with open curiosity and hidden caution. The Lan housed them in quarters not far from their own. Human ergonomics had been considered, a bed he wouldn't fall through, dispensers that printed Terran digestible food that somehow didn't taste of regret. His armor came back scrubbed and patched, his knife sharpened to a better edge than he'd ever managed. Weapons did not come back. He didn't ask. Instruction began, language at dawn, culture at mid-cycle, movement at dusk. Orican language felt like tuning a string until it found the room's hum. Culture was a labyrinth with all the doors open. Their fighting forms were fast, small circle work, the kind of geometry that turns an opponent's weight into a decision they regret. Rowan's Terran training adapted, learned to listen to joints he hadn't known he had. Kir exploded through lessons like a meteor through atmosphere. Brilliant, trailing changes, burning off what no longer served. Their Terran improved daily, their Auric already braided poems into weather. At night, they fell asleep heavy against his side on the couch, the shape of trust. The Lan was rarely idle. When they came, it was with the purposeful quiet of a leader who had welded their life to duty. In public, they were perfect. Armor, rank, economy. In private, they asked questions that told Rowan they were building a map. What does a Terran child fear? What tastes remind you of home? How do your people sing to your dead? He answered as best he could, conscious that his words might become bridges, or bullets. From orbit, the Orican fleet made Terran ships look like knives compared to a symphony. Rowan had expected the question everyone asked in quiet rooms: if they were so strong, why hadn't they simply ended it? He got his answer in a hall of shimmering glass where the Lan met with their senior staff. "Total victory violates the soul accord," said an officer whose stripes meant something between scientist and priest. "And the accord predates first contact with humans by centuries." "Accord?" Rowan asked later, when the room had emptied to the echo of decisions. "A commitment," the Lan said, "not to erase people simply because it is possible. Even when war seems efficient." Their mouth hardened. "Even when we are tempted by grief. It would have been easier to fight monsters. Monsters absolve you, eventually, of the need to see." Rowan swallowed the old comfort and let it die a little. The kin shielding had bound him to a private truth. The public ritual made it law. The Hall of Lines, where ancient families nodded their vows, flooded with officials whose garments made weather when they moved. Rowan stood with Kir and the Lan, palms bare, the frostbite threads along his wrist glowing. Most congratulations were formal, precise. A few were cutting, honed like scalpels. A human at the Archon's hearth? Risk layered over risk. The Lan translated none of those, but Rowan didn't need a device to feel the chill. An elder stepped forward, thin as a line drawing, eyes a color that remembered storms. "General, the Lan binds a Terran into Zeph?" "Unprecedented." The elder's Terran was flawless. "May your nerve match your hope." A blessing and a warning, sewn together. Later, in a quieter alcove, a younger officer approached Rowan, spine stiff with contempt. "This changes nothing, Terran. You are an enemy wrapped in ceremony." Rowan kept his voice mild. "I'm a person trying to keep a child safe. If you must clutch a platitude, that one will do." They sneered, and walked away. Across the room, the Lan watched, expression unreadable but attention like a hand on his back, steadying, or ready to catch. Months made a rhythm: wake, learn, drill, laugh with Kir, navigate the lawn like a coastline, sometimes close enough to count the stones, sometimes far enough to see only the shape. The bond had texture now, a pressure change when the lawn entered a room, a bright thread that tugged at Rowan's attention when Kir was happy or afraid. One quiet cycle, alarms lifted their heads like hounds. The lawn met Rowan at a run. Terran strike force. Deep incursion. Research station at Lumen Spoke 9. They moved together toward command, shoulders nearly touching. What's at 9? Rowan asked. Thalen's jaw eased a fraction. Work that could have eased illnesses in both our kinds. And yes, military models. We live in more than one world at once. The displays painted vectors. The Terrans were good. Cutting lanes where Orican sensors were snowblind. Briefing whispers coalesced. Some in Terran command believed Rowan's defection was theater, that he was a conduit for luring fleets into traps. The strike was a counter-theater. Destroy a heart, then claim necessity. Help me limit deaths, Balan said. Not a command. A request made with the gravity of a vow. Not by betraying your soldiers. By understanding them. Rowan set his teeth and went to work. He sketched his old commander's thinking, where they press, when they pull, the exact kind of risk they'd accept to avoid saying they were wrong. He showed a gap that would tempt a crushing counterstrike and offered an alternative. Leave them a corridor. Make survival a choice they'd recognize and take. Some officers bristled. We could end them. And be the monsters their stories need, Balan said, quiet but cutting. We will be ourselves, not their lies. The response moved like choreography. Precise, disciplined, infuriating to anyone who craved spectacle. They secured staff and core research, let decoy vaults look juicy and empty, and used gravitic slews to open a narrow, stable corridor that shouted in Terran math, exit here, earn your lives. Rowan watched the moment stretch, the Terran captain weighing pride against probability. He pictured the grizzled man's hands on a chair back, the tendons tightening, the breath before yes. Then signals flared. The Terran ships took the corridor. Fire stitched the space around them, not into them. Lost tally, lower than any projection. The station lived enough to repair. Balan stood with Rowan afterward in a small room with a view of stars, and the ache of what had still been lost. You tilted outcomes, they said. This is seen. It will be remembered by those with memory. Will it be seen by those who want not to? Rowan asked. Thalen's mouth slanted. Some prefer grief's heat to truth's cold. But we will make light anyway. Open a channel, Balan said when Terran's signatures appeared at the edge of range hours later. Admiral Shin's face filled the air, familiar from Rowan's past in the way a scar is familiar. Shock slid across the Admiral's features seeing Rowan beside Balan with Kir dozing on a couch behind them. Rowan hail, Shin said. You're supposed to be in a grave we can call heroic. Not my favorite address, Rowan said. I found a better one. He nodded toward Kir. We found each other. Words were knives at first, diplomacy with the safety off. And then something softer came through the feed, weariness. Curiosity. Balan leveraged both with the kind of patience that terrifies the impatient. A protocol agreement emerged, small as a seed, sturdy as 1-2, a joint inquiry into the attack on a civilian Orican transport months later, information exchange about missing prisoners, a promise to keep one channel ajar. Kir woke when the call died and padded over, eyelids heavy. Bridge, they murmured, in Terran this time. Begin. Begin, Balan echoed, and the word held gentleness like a steady hand. The joint inquiry peeled paint from the war's polite face. Saboteurs and polished boots. Funds hidden in companies that sold both sides bullets and grief. An Orican counselor with a smile like a winter sun, a Terran vice-admiral who said, regrettable, like it was a prayer. The conspiracy's shape resisted theater the same way Rowan's bones resisted cold now, automatically. Attempts on Rowan's life spiked, clumsy ones at first, a malfunctioning lift that failed to fail, then clever, a gift of wine made from moss grown in vacuum. The lawn doubled his security and tripled KIR's. You are both targets, they said with the anger of someone who hated being right. Old orders don't know how to hold when new truths arrive. Then let's write new orders, Rowan said. He didn't know, when he said it, how literal he was going to be. When the High Conclave convened to decide whether this fragile diplomacy had oxygen or only wish, Rowan stood below them dressed in gray, the color Oricans wore when they were choosing carefully. He didn't posture. He told a story, of a frozen night and a small being with violet eyes. Of a line that became a bridge because he couldn't step over it without breaking. Peace is not naive, he finished. It is stubborn. It is more work than war and pays slower. But it pays in futures instead of funerals. They argued, old water boiling. In the end, they gave the lawn a mandate that wasn't a leash and wasn't a tailwind either. Permission to continue, to test, to fail and adjust, to get yelled at in 1,000 elegant ways. It was enough. Between meetings and maps, life still occurred. KIR grew into their limbs and opinions, a comet with calculus. They moved between Auric and Terran like a bilingual prayer, their laughter a language that needed no grammar. Rowan learned to cook with Aurican spice that convinced Protein it had a childhood in sunlight. He taught Delon a Terran card game that relied on bluff. They proved both terrible and ferocious at it. One quiet night, Delon stood beside Rowan at a viewport, the Amaranth's hull humming. Our scientists say the thread binding sometimes resonates between species, they said, voice down where secrets sit. Rare. Improbable. Rowan watched their reflection, the two of them a faint overlap. I've seen improbable a lot lately. Delon nodded. The universe is a museum of it. No progress holds unchallenged ground forever. On the anniversary of the night in the cave, alarms again. KIR's transport from an education wing reported boarding by massed units with no heraldry. One guardian down. The rest sealed in a lock with air bleeding away by degrees. Delon didn't speak, they moved. Rowan matched them. The insertion was pure, clean doctrine. Cut power to the attackers' anchor points, peel away their exits, go straight at the throat. They moved as if they'd trained together for a decade, each reading the other's weight, breath, the angle of a shoulder. At the door to the lock, Delon scanned seams, face set. Cutting will lose the chamber. Rowan dropped to a knee and found a panel Terran engineers had hidden like a joke. He met KIR's eyes through the armored glass and signed, left, low 3 screws, quarter turn, push. KIR's hands, steady despite blue lips, did exactly that. The manual release thumped. The door budged, then gave. They pulled them out while the chamber exhaled itself into death. KIR went to the lawn first, as it should be, then collided with Rowan's chest and stayed there, heartbeat alive against his ribs. Relief was an ache you could drown in. Terran ships arrived late but not too late to matter. Admiral Shin's face in the air again, gaze tracking KIR clinging to Rowan's sleeve and Thalen's palm on their child's hair. Orders hardened and softened in Shin's eyes in the same breath. We are told this attack wasn't yours, Delon said. Help us prove who it was. Shin surprised them both. We were told the same, he said. Help us prove it wasn't you. Investigation teams wrote truth into the record in cautious ink. Meanwhile, work continued in places with white light and antiseptic jokes, gene resonance studies that might someday erase certain diseases from both species, gravitic architecture that could keep ships safer in storms no one yet understood, a common emergency protocol for evacuations that didn't check flag first. On a day like a hellbreath, Rowan, Delon, and KIR stood in a geometry of glass above a new neutral lab spinning over Thria. The planet's storms looked almost gentle from here. I don't know what to call myself, Rowan admitted, almost to the glass. Not Terran proper anymore. Not Aurican. Something else. You, Delon said simply. Rowan hail of House Sef by thread and by choice. They angled toward him, shoulder brushing his. Kin shield. It is a title. It is also a name we give to certain kinds of future. KIR threaded their fingers through both of theirs. Bridge, they said, certain now? Not a beginning, not an end. A fact. Rowan thought of a ruin and a decision made in less than a breath and 1,000 breaths after where he remade it again and again. He pictured the long work ahead, slow, stubborn, sacred in its smallness. He let the word settle in his chest like a tool that finally found the right grip. Bridge, he agreed. And the three of them stood in the light, hands linked, listening to a ship that sang a song older than war and younger than their hope. The first face from the old life was Lieutenant Isila's. The neutral platform called Narrow Water held in a Lagrange pocket between Thria and its two large moon, all ribbed corridors and glass atriums that pretended at safety. Terran uniforms pressed the seams of one wing, Orican armor found shadows in another. Between them, air perfumed with the careful flowers of diplomacy. Rowan walked beside Dalan and a small escort, KIR 3 steps ahead translating signage into Auric for the joy of it. Then the crowd parted, and Isila stood there, thinner, older by hard months. Torres flanked her, eyes wide, relief and anger braided tight. Sergeant, Isila said, voice steady as a tabletop. Or is it Kinshield now? Rowan, he said. Still human. Still me. She looked past him to the lawn with the soldier's quick assessment. Archon. The lawn inclined their head. Lieutenant. You kept your people alive where many would not have. You walked away with one of theirs. Isila answered without heat. You forced choices I have to live with. She turned back to Rowan. I had to write a death letter to your sister. Then unwrote it when command decided missing helped their press better than dead. You put me in that tangle. I know, Rowan said. I made that knot. I'll help pull it apart if I can. Torres blurted. You saved the kid, Sarge. The words came out like he'd been waiting months to get permission to say them. You did right. Isila's mouth twitched. Doing right is rarely regulation, she said, and then, softer. I didn't stop you in that ravine. I could have. I didn't. I have to live with that too. The lawn took the opening the way water finds a crack. Help us live with it better. We ask a small thing first. Trade names for our dead on Lumen Spoke 9. Let us send yours home clean. Isila held their gaze, then nodded once. I can move that. One knot at a time. Diplomacy dressed itself for market in the atrium veil. Hanging gardens, glass floors over black space, a bandstand where a trio of Terran strings tangled with an Orican flute that sounded like wine through a memory. Delegations drifted like schools of fish, colors signaling caution, invitation, rank. KIR led 2 Terran kids from a science cohort past a bioluminescent fern that pulsed in time with footfalls. It listens, they explained earnestly. We listened back. The children nodded with serious respect that would calcify into stories later. Under the music, Thalen's palm found Rowan's wrist briefly, the luminous frost of the thread binding brightening. A sensation, not pain, not warning, ran under his skin. He scanned, breath changing. Hear that? He murmured. Harmonics wrong, Dalan said. Something is singing a note it shouldn't. They followed the dissonance to a brace under the eastern gallery. Someone had anchored a mimetic emitter the size of a fist, set to leak a melody that coaxed panic where none was. In humans it would itch as suspicion, in Oricans it would tug lineage loyalty into brittle fear. Clever. Cowardly. Rowan knelt palm flat, reading its pulse the way he sometimes read engines. The lawn knelt opposite. They touched the casing like a luthier tuning a resistant string. KIR arrived without being called, angled their head, and made a soft, precise tone that matched the emitter's heart. The device hesitated the way animals hesitate before bolting. The lawn adjusted a harmonic on their chord translator. Rowan killed the power at the exact breath it sagged. He held the inert thing in both hands. Stagecraft again, he said quietly. If the panic starts here, the story will be that we were never meant to share air. Then we will make a louder story, Dalan said. They did not mean volume. Security teams traced lines from the emitter to a vendor who had paid in scrupulously laundered funds, to a relay with Terran serials scraped and Orican fibers glued on. A clumsy frame with elegant aims. The station's commander came to them pale and furious. "Someone wanted blood in the glass," she said. "We'll keep the glass standing." Rowan watched Kir show the Terran kids how to whistle the membrane of the fern without touching it. He let his shoulders loosen by degrees. "Standing is a start," he said. Hardliners needed a theater of their own. They chose an old one. The lawn received the summons in a language that tasted of iron. "Silence, court," they said, passing the tablet to Rowan. "It predates microphones. You prove your case in quiet. No rhetoric, no gestures, no decorations. Just memory." The court convened in a room stripped to stone. The elders sat along a curve like the first ribs of a ship. They did not wear the trappings of office, which somehow made the weight heavier. The charge wasn't treason, that would have been too simple, but dereliction of tradition, binding a human into House Seth, letting Terran feet soften Orican floors. Threatening lineage by diluting ritual with novelty. Rowan could not speak. That was the rule. But he could be present, and presence carries its own argument. The lawn stood in the circle's center with the stillness of a tower. The first elder struck a chime. The lawn answered not with voice but with action. They unfastened the plates over their forearms, revealing the faint map of old thread bindings, ancestral lines, kin pledges, the history of a house and luminous scars. They extended one arm. A young officer from the opposing faction stepped forward and, by custom, laid their palm beside Thalen's. The threads did not brighten. The young officer looked triumphant. The lawn extended their other arm to Rowan without looking. Rowan, heart elsewhere, set his palm to theirs. The thread binding along his wrist rose as if warmed. The room brightened a shade you could feel. Air changed note. Silence, courts do not gasp. But something moved along the curve of elders, a ripple like wind finding fields. The lawn bowed to the oldest one. The bow said, "I have not broken the root law, I have extended it." The elder tapped the chime once more. Judgment, not absolution, permission, to continue, bound to conditions. Thalen's authority remained, ringed now by responsibilities knotted in public. After, in a corridor, Thalen's breath left them in a quiet exhale. "Silence is louder than speeches," Rowan said. "Speeches are often for the speaker," Delon replied. "Silence is for the truth." Torres asked for a meeting at a noodle stall on the Terran side where broth came thick and garlic meant comfort. He arrived out of breath, eyes scanning the ceiling for mics, which was wrong. Mics live in tables. "They're called Pale Wing," he said without yaw or preface. "A cell inside our own. They get orders from nobody who has a name. False flag expertise. They laid the emitter. They're planning a hit on the neutral lab, make it look like an Orican purity strike. Why tell me?" Rowan kept his voice low. The broth steamed up and made everything feel warmer than it was. "Because I like sleeping," Torres said, shaky grin failing to land. "Because after Lumen spoke I can't swallow the line about necessary escalations. Because you taught me to fix a stuck feeder by listening to it first." The grin turned real for a breath. "This isn't listening." Rowan could take the intel to Shin and risk it going to ground. Or he could take it to the lawn and risk creating a different kind of confusion. Or he could do both and make a bigger mess that might catch more fish. "Proof?" he asked. Torres slid a coin across the counter. It wasn't money. It was a key with a heartbeat, a one-use sigil for a locker on the service level. "Logs. Names without names. A shipment of microbreathers that never shows up in any catalog." Rowan left money too big for noodles because it paid for courage instead. He moved the key. Delon moved the pieces. Shin sat in a dark room and chose to believe a man he had once taught to dress a wound under fire. The trap was a box you could see in 3 dimensions and a choice you could not run from inside it. The magnetosphere hiccuped. Space weather, the kind that makes pilots religious, surged from Freya's sun with a humorless roar. Lights slit the black like torn aurora. Comms dropped to mutters. The plan, as elegant as a dancer's line, flexed into something rougher. Pale wing strike boats came in hot, disguised as Orican fast prongs, The storm pushed their disguise into unmasking, thrusters flickered in Terran rhythms, signatures slipped. The joint defense grid, jury-rigged for exactly this crossing of catastrophe and treachery, woke. Oracle coils sang counter to the storm, smoothing the worst troughs. Terran tugs threw grapples on tumbling debris before it could slice the veil. In the mess, Pale Wing overcommit, thinking confusion bought them cover. It did not. Rowan rode a tug with Asila at the stick. She flew like she did everything, minimal waste, maximum intent. Never thought I'd taxi one of these for an Oracle, she muttered, then grinned. Never thought I'd get to say I stitched a sunstorm to a lie. They bracketed a strike boat trying to bolt. A pulse from the Amaranth's coils took its weapons off the table. Shin's voice, crisp despite static, cut through. Stand down and live. Most did. One didn't. He went for override. The tug bucked, Isila swore, flipped ballast, and let force go where it wanted enough to miss them. Later, under normal gravity and shaky knees, Rowan put a hand on Isila's shoulder. You saved us. She shrugged, then let the shrug fall. We saved us. That's new. The first Terran children stepped onto Amaranth's garden decks weeks later in soft boots and big eyes. The house had argued for days about shoes. Kir met them at the threshold like a planetary ambassador, which in a way they were. This is a listening tree, Kir told a cluster of kids, palm flat on bark that reflected light like water. It stores songs. Do you want to put one in? A girl with hair in 6 braids sang the alphabet, half shy and half daring. The tree kept it, leaves silvering. An Oracle elder placed a cord beside it that smelled like river stones. Rowan watched the lawn at the edge of the group, posture relaxed in the way of someone practicing relaxation as a skill. A Terran father approached them, clearly braced. General, he said. My son, he asked if it's safe. I told him, as safe as anything is. He spread his hands, a human gesture of surrender. That's the best I have. It is also the truth, Dalan said. Safety is a tide. Today it comes in. Rowan ran a class on emergency basics, Terran practices translated into auric shapes and back, how to find exits in unfamiliar architecture, how to trust the coil's temperature with your skin without touching, how to say, help, in 3 languages without speaking. At the end, Kir tugged his sleeve. Can we go to the fern? They whispered. I promised it new whistles. We keep our promises, he said, and followed their quick feet. The accord wasn't a trumpet. It was a ledger, corridors designated for exit, not assault, a prohibition on weapons that simply erase, protections for neutral labs and schools, formal recognition of kin shield as a legal status in both jurisdictions. Neither prisoner nor citizen, a bridge given paperwork. Shin signed with a pen whose cap bore a chip of stone from Earth's oldest observatory. The lawn signed with a stylus grown from a vine that had climbed their house's oldest wall. Isila stood behind Shin. The elder from the Silence Court stood behind the lawn. Kir stood between, small hands folded, solemn as sunrise. Reporters tried to tease theater from it. Pundits tried to calcify it into victory or defeat. The accord refused to be either. It was work. It named a committee that would argue over import tariffs on medical isotopes, and a hotline that would ring at 3:17 in the morning with a captain who didn't want to shoot calling someone who didn't want to be shot. After, in a side room that smelled faintly of citrus and ozone, Shin shook Thalen's hand. We will be yelled at, he predicted. We will continue anyway, Dalan said. Rowan filed the moment under durable things. Pale Wing didn't die. It retreated and renamed itself. On Oracle feeds, sharp-tongued commentators spat about dilution, about thread bindings turned to fashion. Work didn't become less for having a name. It got heavier and carried better. On the Amaranth, in a garden whose light didn't mimic any sun but felt warmer than most, Rowan and Kir built a kite that wasn't a kite, a listening frame that converted wind into sketch. The lawn knelt to tie a knot with a patience that would shame surgeons. The frame lifted, found the ship's vents, and drew the air in lines on a membrane that darkened where currents were strongest. It draws what is invisible, Kir said, pleased. Most bridges do, Rowan said. Dallon watched the membrane's lines gather in a shape that looked like topology and hope. Our engineers would call that data, they said. Our poets would call it omen. What do you call it? Rowan asked. Homework, Dallon decided, the pause between words deliberate. Work we do at home. Work that makes a home. A chime sounded in Rowan's wrist thread, an appointment, a briefing, a small argument about how to phrase a clause so it did not become a loophole. He didn't move yet. The kite flickered, wind sketched itself into map. Kir laughed at a dog that was not a dog, a house pet grown to keep pests out of the lettuce beds and children in delight. Rowan looked at the two lives that had claimed him and the two worlds they tied together. Enemy to protector. Stranger to kin. The bridge held underfoot not because it was finished, but because they kept building while they walked. Back to work, he said. Back, Dallon agreed, and the three of them turned together toward the long corridor where stubborn, unglamorous peace waited to be done. Peace did not erase the scars on Thria. The basalt flats where Rowan had once carried Kir through shellfire still lay in ruin. Now they were ringed with survey pylons and prefabricated shelters. The Joint Council called it the Ember Site Project, a shared effort to rebuild a place that symbolized too much. Rowan stepped from the shuttle with Dallon and Kir. The air still stung, the cold dry enough to bite lungs. Terran engineers in orange jackets and Orokin builders in pale armor moved side by side, a choreography that still felt surreal. One group raised struts while another charted magnetic faults. For every argument about method, there were 3 moments of silent cooperation. Isila met them near the perimeter. She looked different without rank plates, hair longer, shoulders lighter, but eyes still sharp. Sarge, she said, then corrected. Rowan. Welcome back to the beginning. This ground remembers too much, Rowan said, gaze drifting to the black scar where the blast had nearly taken him. That's why we're here, Isila answered. To teach it something new. Kir ran ahead, weaving between workers, their laugh carrying. They stopped at the scar, kneeling as if listening to it. Then they placed a small crystalline toy, an Orokin comfort object Dallon had salvaged from home, into the soil. Memory, they said softly. But also seed. Thalen's hand brushed Rowan's. Children understand what elders forget. We plant where fire burned. That is the harder courage. Rowan nodded, feeling the old fear soften just enough to let breath through. Not everyone welcomed Ember Site. At night, supply caches went missing. A Terran drone patrol caught glimpses of cloaked figures moving along the ridges, too large for animals, too quiet for chance. Rowan walked the perimeter with an Orokin sentry named Vale, a young officer whose armor still looked too new. They stopped often, listening more than looking. The wind on Thria carried harmonics if you paid attention, the difference between storm and footsteps. You think they'll strike? Vale asked, voice tuned through their translator. They'll try, Rowan said. Someone always does. Change scares the ones who feed on the old. Hours later, motion sensors pinged. 3 figures approached the supply line. Rowan signaled silence, then crouched, letting the wind carry his outline into shadow. Vale mirrored him. The intruders wore patched Terran and Orokin armor both, painted gray to blur allegiance. False flags again. They carried small canisters, volatile enough to undo weeks of trust. Rowan's body moved before thought, cutting distance, tackling one at the knees. Vale's coilbolt cracked the air, searing another's weapon to slag. Pinned, the third spat words in Terran. Peace makes corpses fatter. Rowan pressed the intruder's arm behind his back. No. War does. When the saboteurs were dragged inside the camp, Isila looked at Rowan across the flood lamps. Different uniforms, she said. Same poison. Dallon joined them, eyes narrowing at the canisters. They want a massacre to be inevitable. We will give them only trials. Rowan exhaled, every rib remembering old pain. Then we keep watch. Every night, until watch isn't needed anymore. The rebuilding took months. Workers joked in a pidgin of Terran and Auric. Children of both species began chasing each other around supply stacks without asking which side they belonged to. It was small, fragile, but real. KIR became a fixture. They guided workers to hidden crevices, found overlooked mineral veins, and scolded engineers when they ignored the wind's voice. Their laughter rang louder than drills. One evening, KIR stood on a half-built balcony overlooking the flats. They held Rowan's old ration pack, patched, frayed, the one he had first carried them in. They lifted it up like a banner. "This saved me," they declared in careful Terran. "But also him. And her. And you." They pointed to Rowan, to the lawn, to Asila, and then to the crowd. "Because bridge is not only stone or metal. Bridge is choice." Again and again and again. The camp fell quiet. For once, no one translated. They understood. Thalen's gaze softened as they watched their child claim a role neither council nor commander had written. Rowan felt something heavy in his chest loosen, a knot untied by a child's plain words. Asila whispered to Rowan, "She'll change more than any treaty ever will." "Yeah," Rowan said. "She already has." News from orbit was less hopeful. Pale-wing remnants and Aurican purists had formed an alliance of sabotage, iron and frost bound by spite. They struck convoys, seeded false stories into both networks, whispered lies meant to curdle every fragile handshake. Rowan met with Shin in a narrow briefing room aboard a Terran cruiser. The Admiral's face was lined deeper, but his eyes carried something almost like trust. "They want us back in the trenches," Shin said. "We can't give them that. But every convoy we lose makes the Council twitch." Thalen's projection shimmered above the table, their voice chord calm. "We track them, but each shadow spawns 3 more. They are a sickness that feeds on fear." "Then we stop feeding it," Rowan said. "Not just defense. Not just arrests. Show both peoples what we build when they're busy burning." Shin studied him, then chuckled low. "Once a sergeant, always thinking about morale." "Morale wins wars," Rowan said. "And maybe it can end one." They planned not another strike, but a demonstration, a joint relief mission to a colony struck by solar flares, where Terran medicine and Aurican shielding saved lives together. Cameras would see what bombs never could. "Symbols again," Shin muttered. "Symbols are stronger than ordnance," Delan corrected. Rowan sat back, thinking of KIR's banner made of a ration pack. He couldn't argue. "Would you like me to keep pushing forward until we reach the full 100,000 character epic, section by section, like this? I can continue weaving in more arcs." Betrayals, deeper ties between Rowan and Delan, KIR's growth, and the eventual test where peace itself hangs by a thread binding. The colony of Jada's Verge sat on the edge of a scarred star, where flares spat radiation like tantrums. Its domes were patched, its hospitals overcrowded, its people suspicious of visitors from either banner. Rowan, Delan, and Asila arrived with a convoy half Terran, half Aurican, medicine packed alongside shielding coils, water purification arrays set beside heat exchangers. The air was thin, metallic with dust. Children clung to their mothers as the ships landed, their eyes wide. Some spat on the ground when Aurican armor appeared. Others ducked when Terran insignia gleamed. Centuries of stories don't fade with one handshake. KIR broke the spell first. They climbed a supply crate, voice small but carrying. "We came to fix, not to fight." Then they opened their ration pack, the same one they'd kept as a symbol, and handed out sweets they'd hoarded. Human candy, Aurican crystal chews, mismatched but offered freely. One boy with burn scars across his cheek accepted the sweet and didn't throw it back. Another child followed. Soon half the crowd was pressing forward, cautious but curious. Inside the clinics, Terran doctors and Aurican medics found themselves arguing over triage protocols. Rowan shoved between them. "Do both. One stabilizes, one heals deeper. The patients don't care about your manuals." The argument cooled into grim teamwork. Hours later, a flare cracked against the dome, frying its shielding grid. Orican engineers threw up a coil net, Terrans pumped auxiliary power, Rowan and Isila directed terrified colonists into shelters. Delan stood at the heart of it all, arms lifted as if conducting, their voice weaving instructions into both languages. When the flare passed, the dome still stood. No one had died. And the colonists, for the first time in years, cheered not one banner, but both. Within a week, the feeds carried images of Terran medics working shoulder to shoulder with Orican healers. The shot of Kir handing candy to scarred children replayed more times than Rowan could count. Headlines on Terran stations muttered about propaganda stunts. Orican hardliners snarled about sentimental dilution. But in taverns, in farmsteads, in barracks too tired to fight, people whispered maybe. Shin summoned Rowan aboard the Terran flagship. The Verge mission softened a lot of knots, he admitted, pouring a glass of sour whiskey either of them really wanted. But the knives are still out. Pale Wing's already painting you as a traitor actor on Orican payroll. They'll say the same about you soon enough, Rowan said. Difference is, Shin replied, I have medals to hide behind. You've got. He trailed off, gaze shifting. What do you have, Rowan? Rowan thought of Kir's small hand in his, of Thalen's steady presence in the Silence Court, of Isila's bitter grin when they survived one more ambush. Something stronger than medals, he said. People who'll stand when the shooting starts again. Shin raised his glass in a salute. Let's hope they don't. Peace always draws its sharpest enemies from within. One night cycle aboard the Amaranth, alarms cut through Rowan's quarters. Kir bolted upright from their cot, eyes wide. Rowan grabbed his sidearm, human make, but fitted with Orican grips, and sprinted into the corridor. Saboteurs had breached the hydroponics ring. Explosives rigged against the water columns, the lungs of the ship. Their armor bore no insignia, just gray. Pale Wing's cousins, or Orican purists, or both, it no longer mattered. Rowan and Lon arrived at the same time, moving without words. Rowan dropped one with a shoulder tackle. Thalen's coil spears sang another to ash. But the third had already primed a charge. Kir screamed. Stop! Their small voice cut sharper than plasma. The saboteur hesitated, just for a second. Enough for Rowan to slam his weapon down, breaking the detonator hand. Pinned, the intruder spat blood and words. You think bridges hold? Bridges burn. Always. Delan crouched low, their voice a whisper like thunder. Only if we stop standing on them. Security dragged the saboteur away. Rowan leaned against the hydroponics wall, heart hammering. Kir pressed their forehead to his side, trembling. Safe now? They whispered. For tonight, Rowan said. That's enough. Tomorrow, we keep it safe again. The High Council convened again, this time with Terran envoys in the gallery. The chamber buzzed like a hive full of knives. Some elders spoke of progress, others demanded retribution for sabotage. One hardline counselor rose, voice sharp. Every act of terror proves the same truth. This human experiment weakens us. Strip the binding, exile the anomaly, and we restore purity. Murmurs rippled. All eyes slid to Rowan, standing with Lon and Kir. He could not be silent. Every act of sabotage, he said, voice carrying, proves the saboteurs are afraid. Afraid of what we build here. Afraid of children who laugh together. Afraid of the day when Terran and Orican names share a gravestone not because they killed each other, but because they grew old side by side. The chamber hushed. Kir, solemn, lifted their ration pack high like they had at the Ember site. Bridge, they said. Not weapon. Bridge. For the first time, even the hardest counselor faltered. Silence settled not as rejection, but as consideration. Delan stepped forward, voice like steady ice. We asked not for purity. We asked for survival. And survival has always meant change. The council did not vote that day. But when they dismissed, Rowan saw in their eyes something new, not agreement, but the first cracks in certainty. The joint accord had promised shared trade ports. The first was at Naro's docks, a skeletal hub once used to funnel weapons that now stood as a promise of grain and medicine. Rowan stood with Delan on the upper gantry, watching freighters painted half in Terran gray, half in Aurican silver, easing to dock. Children pointed at banners stitched together, awkward but sincere. For a fragile heartbeat, it looked like peace had teeth. Then the blast ripped through Dock 3. Metal screamed as containers collapsed. Fire blossomed in zero-G, a blooming sphere of orange tethered only by atmosphere scrubbers. People ran, Aurican and Terran both, their screams indistinguishable. Rowan and Isila sprinted down into the smoke, Delan striding after, Kir clutched by a guard. "Get them out!" Rowan shouted, shoving workers toward exits. Isila dragged a dockhand pinned under a spar while Rowan kicked the detonator pack away before it could chain react. Through the chaos, Rowan glimpsed a shape moving with intent. Gray armor again. Pale wing. He barreled after, lungs raw, boots clanging against burning steel. The saboteur spun, weapon raised, only to falter when Thalen's voice thundered in Auric. Words like stone and storm. The saboteur flinched as if those syllables carried weight heavier than weapons. Rowan slammed him down. The detonator skittered across the deck. Isila stamped it flat with one sharp boot. When the smoke cleared, Dock 3 was wounded but standing. And the saboteur lived long enough to spit a warning. "This is nothing. The bridge will fall in flame." Rowan met Thalen's gaze across firelight. "Then we rebuild it out of steel." After the dock blast, morale sagged. Workers avoided eye contact. Terran freighters delayed departure. Aurican builders muttered of curses. Kir refused to let silence rot. They gathered a group of children, Terran and Aurican both, in one of the half-finished halls. Rowan came searching, only to hear their voice echoing. "This is a bridge." But bridges don't live unless people walk them. The children stared, puzzled. Kir knelt, picked up a length of conduit, and laid it across a gap between crates. "See? Bridge." They crossed it, arms out wide. Then they gestured. "Now you." A Terran boy shuffled, crossed. An Aurican girl followed, laughing when the conduit wobbled. Then two crossed at once, holding hands. The crates swayed but held. Rowan leaned against the wall, throat tight. Delan joined him, murmuring, "She builds better than we do." "She's braver," Rowan said. Word spread. Within days, dock workers from both species began leaving tokens, patches, tools, trinkets, on that makeshift bridge of conduit. A ritual born in fire and play. Pale Wing's blast had been meant to break morale. Instead, a child had turned rubble into symbol. The Council could no longer ignore reality. A summit was called the Thria's Polar Citadel, a fortress carved into ice cliffs that shimmered like crystal. Representatives from Terran fleets and Aurican houses arrived under banners, all nerves and suspicion. Rowan, Delan, and Kir entered under escort. Isila walked with Shin, armor stripped of insignia but dignity intact. Inside the glacier-lit hall, accusations erupted. "Sabotage proves their side cannot control its radicals. Every dead dockhand is proof of your deceit. Peace is a mask for conquest." The voices overlapped, rising to a cacophony. Rowan saw hands twitch near weapons. Then Kir stepped into the center, ration packs slung at their side. Their voice trembled, but carried. "You are loud. But loud does not fix." They held up the conduit token, a piece of the children's bridge. "We fixed with play. We fixed with hands. You fixed with shouting?" Silence fell like a hammer. The eldest Aurican elder whispered, "Out of the mouths of children." Shin leaned close to Rowan. "Never thought I'd see the day a kid's schoolmaster's admirals." Rowan's lips curved, though his chest ached. "That's the only reason we've made it this far." But Pale Wing had prepared its own summit. As delegates argued in the hall, shadow teams crept through the Citadel's ice tunnels, planting explosives in cooling vents that fed the generators. Rowan felt it first, a hum in the floor wrong by half a beat. He looked at the lawn. Their violet eyes confirmed it. They moved fast, through a side corridor Kir held close. They found the charges strapped against ice veins, already blinking red. Too many, Rowan breathed. Not if we freeze them, Delon countered. They lifted their palms, thread-binding light crawling across their skin. The ice thickened, seizing around the charges. Cold buys time. Rowan smashed detonators with the butt of his rifle. Isila and Shin's guard arrived, dragging saboteurs half-conscious. By the time alarms sounded in the hall, the worst had been averted. Delegates spilled out to see Terran and Orican soldiers shoulder to shoulder, hauling explosives like sacks of rot. Together, Rowan shouted into the cold air, voice raw. That's how we survive. For once, no one shouted back. They listened. They called it the Long Night. 14 strikes launched within hours, scattered across trade routes, labs, and settlements where Terran and Orican workers lived side by side. The attacks were too coordinated, too precise. Pale Wing wasn't lashing out. They were making their final play. Reports crashed into Rowan's comms like hail. Convoy down at the Keel Arc. Medical hub breached at Lorien Spire. Saboteurs inside Thria's lower wards. Every channel screamed. Fear thickened like smoke. If Pale Wing could make the peace look fragile everywhere at once, trust would collapse. Delon stood with Rowan in the Amarant's command chamber, violet eyes bright with calm fire. They want the bridge to fall not by force, but by despair. If all sides lose faith at once, no treaty can stand. And if we split our forces, we're chasing shadows. Isila growled. Rowan looked at the map, every red flare a knife in his chest. Then we don't split. We concentrate. We hit their heart. Where? Shin demanded, his hollow form flickering. Rowan pointed to Naro's docks. It's where trade first stood. Where they tried to burn us once. They'll try again. And when they do, we'll be ready. The docks bristled with defenses, Orican coil arrays, Terran flak lines, patrols that walked in mixed pairs. Workers had strung Kir's conduit, bridge, across the central plaza like a banner. Tokens still dangled from it, patches, charms, children's scribbled notes. Rowan stood beneath it as alarms shrieked. Strike boats fell from orbit like knives. Saboteurs burst from hidden compartments in cargo. Pale Wing had bet everything on this siege. The first blast rocked Dock 2. Terran Marines charged side by side with Orican wardens, smoke and plasma fusing into chaos. Rowan fought shoulder to shoulder with Isila, rifle cracking, boots slipping in coolant. Across the bay, Thalen's voice thundered through comms, steadying panicked fighters. Hold the line. The bridge holds because you stand. Then Rowan saw it, Kir, hustled by a guard toward shelter, stumbling as debris rained. A saboteur broke from the smoke, blade flashing. Rowan didn't think. He sprinted, lungs fire dove. The blade glanced his armor, cut deep. His hand clamped down on the saboteur's wrist, rage blind. He tore the weapon free and dropped the man with a strike that rattled bone. Kir's small hands clutched his arm, wide eyes shimmering. Bridge holds, they whispered, trembling. Yeah, Rowan gasped, blood hot against his ribs. Still holds. At the northern hangar, Pale Wing's heaviest push surged. Heavy rigs painted false Orican glyphs lumbered forward, weapons glowing. Workers screamed. Marines faltered. Delon stepped into the open. Their armor flared silver blue, thread-binding marks alive like lightning. They raised their coil spear and sang. It wasn't song as Terrans knew it. It was resonance, deep, layered, vibrating air and bone. The rigs stuttered as the frequencies twisted their circuits. Windows shattered. Even Rowan, half a kilometer away, felt his teeth buzz. Orican soldiers rallied behind their general's voice. Terran Marines found their rhythm in the thunder. Together they surged, breaking the rigs apart piece by piece. Rowan caught his breath watching the feeds. He'd seen generals inspire, but this was something older. Not command. Not fear. Belief. When the last rig toppled, Valen's voice quieted to a whisper carried through the calms. The bridge holds. The siege should have ended there. But Pale Wing had hidden one last blade. Beneath the central plaza, charges laced the foundations. Enough to bring Naro's docks down into vacuum. Rowan, limping from blood loss, followed Kir and Nilan into the tunnels. The glow of detonators painted walls crimson. Too many to disarm in time. Valen's face was carved of stone. We freeze them. Again. It won't hold, Rowan said, staring at the sheer number. Not all. Kir stepped forward, eyes bright. Then we break the song. They knelt, palms against the tunnel floor. A trembling hum rose, child's voice, uncertain but pure. The detonators flickered as if confused, circuits caught between triggers. Not enough, Nilan hissed. Rowan dropped beside them, adding his own rough hum, off-key, human, but strong. Nilan joined, their resonant voice weaving through both. 3 notes, 3 lives, 1 chord. The charges sputtered, then died. Silence crashed heavier than explosions. Rowan sagged, blood dripping, arm around Kir. Nilan crouched close, eyes luminous. You are bridge, they whispered. Not symbol. Not word. Bridge. Rowan managed a weak grin. Guess we proved it. The siege broke with Pale Wing routed, their strike boats shattered, their saboteurs dead or captured. Naros still stood. The conduit bridge still hung, singed by fire but unbroken. Delegates walked its length the next morning, Terran boots, Oricon steps, side by side. Cameras caught it. Children laughed under smoke-stained banners. The feeds called it the dawn at Naros. Rowan stood with Nilan and Kir on the plaza edge, ribs bound, body aching. Isila leaned against a crate, grinning despite burns. Shin's voice echoed through comms, rough with relief. You did it, Sergeant. Hell, you did more than I ever thought possible. Rowan looked at Kir, who was watching the tokens sway in the wind. Then at Nilan, whose hand rested on his shoulder with weight that was more than comfort. No, Rowan said quietly. We did. The bridge still held. And maybe, just maybe, it always would. Peace tasted like ash at first. The smoke of Naros still hung in Rowan's lungs as Terran and Oricon medics patched bodies side by side. The casualty lists ran long: Marines, wardens, dockworkers, saboteurs. Too many names, but fewer than the number Pale Wing had gambled on. Rowan stood in the plaza beneath the battered conduit. Bridge. The tokens still dangled, burnt patches, scorched charms, but they had survived fire and siege alike. Kir tugged on his sleeve. They tried to burn bridge, Kir said softly. Bridge burned them instead. Rowan smiled faintly, though his ribs ached. Not sure that's how bridges work. It is now, Nilan murmured. Their voice carried no triumph, only gravity. Every victory is a weight, Rowan. This one will press on us for years. Isila joined, bandaged arm in a sling. Don't look so grim, General. People will remember Naros. You gave them something harder to twist than lies. Rowan scanned the plaza. Terran and Oricon children playing tag between supply crates, their laughter echoing against scorched walls. For the first time in months, he let himself believe Isila might be right. The High Council of Orica met in a vaulted chamber carved from basalt, its ceiling glowing faintly with thread light. Across the void, Terran command mirrored the gathering via hollow, Shin seated among admirals who wore suspicion like medals. Pale Wing's defeat had forced their hand. The people demanded structure. The bridge has held in fire, Nilan declared, standing in the circle's center, Rowan and Kir flanking them. Now it must be sealed in law. A Terran admiral scowled. One battle doesn't erase 5 years of blood. What you ask is unnatural. Unnatural? Rowan shot back. His voice was rough but steady. I watched a Terran medic and an Oricon healer save the same child with the same hands. If that's unnatural, maybe we need more of it. An elder leaned forward, eyes luminous. And what of loyalty, human? You abandoned your command. Rowan straightened. I chose a child over orders. If that's betrayal, I'll wear it. But don't tell me it wasn't loyalty to something larger than flags. Silence stretched, brittle but alive. Kir broke it with a whisper audible in the chamber's hush. Bridge is loyalty. To tomorrow. The words lodged deeper than arguments ever could. The council deferred final judgment, but the tide had shifted. Defeat had not killed Pale Wing. In fractured safe houses across asteroid belts, in half-dead stations with stolen power, they regrouped. Their leader, known only as the Pale Voice, stood before a flickering display. Naros has made them arrogant. They believe bridges cannot fall. That is when bridges are weakest. A zealot spat. The child. The hybrid bond. They make her symbol. Break her, and the bridge shatters. The Pale Voice's hand snapped out, silencing him. Not yet. Symbols thrive on martyrdom. First we bleed them slowly. Grain lines. Water stations. Families. Every wound whispers, you are not safe together. He turned to the others, voice cold. We will not end the bridge with fire. We will rot it until they pull it down themselves. Weeks later, on Amaranth's garden deck, Rowan watched Kir teaching Terran and Orican children a game with stones and cords. Their laughter rolled like water over rock. Yet Rowan's chest tightened. He remembered the Pale-Winged Saboteur's sneer, bridges burn. Always. Delon joined him, quiet as breath. You fear the weight will crack it. Rowan nodded. I've seen too many campaigns start with hope and end in graves. What if Naros was just luck? Delon laid a hand on his arm. Their touch was warm, grounding. Luck is a spark. But this, they gestured at the children, at Kir's bright smile. This is work. And work remakes worlds. Rowan exhaled. Then I'll keep working. The accord that followed Naros was thin as paper, fragile as glass. But it was real. It promised shared ports, joint patrols, cultural exchanges. It named Rowan Vance as Kinshield Liaison, the first human granted standing within Orican law. Reporters asked him what that meant. Rowan only said, It means I keep walking the bridge. Delon shouldered the duties of general and parent both, their authority tempered by the bond that scandalized some and inspired others. Kir became the bridge's brightest symbol, child of two peoples, carrying scars of war and laughter of tomorrow. Their words spread through feeds like sparks. Bridge is not stone. Bridge is choice. And Pale Wing's shadow still lingered, gnawing at edges. But for now, under stars that had once only known war, Terran and Orican hands worked together, lifting beams, healing wounds, writing treaties. Rowan stood on a gantry one quiet night, Delon beside him, Kir asleep in their shared quarters. The stars glimmered like promises. You think it'll last? Rowan asked. Thalen's hand brushed his, binding light faint against the dark. If we keep building. Every day. Every step. Even when it hurts. Rowan smiled faintly. Then we'll keep walking. And together they looked out at the horizon where war had once been, and where, if they were stubborn enough, peace might root at last.